Well, we've been using the calculator predominantly to find our descriptive statistics. It can be nice to see some of the commands in Excel separately that can find us these values. So here's a quick list of some of those tools. So if we wanted to find the mean of a data list, I'm just going to use this data list here as an example. Excel doesn't use the command mean. It uses the command average. We know that mean is only one type of average, but it is one of the more common types of average to use. So if we just hit equals and type average, and then a nice beginning parenthesis, highlight our data. It is good to end that parenthesis and enter. We get a nice mean, an average for our data. We can get to that same command a couple different ways. If you have the ribbon up, if you go under your editing tools under here, there's an auto sum tool, but under that you can have the average. So if you highlight average, it'll put an average command there, and you can again highlight your data and highlight your data and get that same result. Furthermore, if we just get rid of this for a second, if we go to formulas, you can use like your recently used functions. We'll have a bunch of them. Under more functions, there's a list of statistical functions. There's a whole bunch of them. That's why there can't be a special button for each of them. But under there, you can find any of these commands, for example, average. And then again, it'll ask you, this time in a sub window, but ask you to highlight your data. And if you have multiple value sets you need to put in there, you can. But again, gives us that same value. So all of these commands we can get to from a couple of different ways. And if you ever forget a command or want to look for some other commands, you can go to that formulas, more functions, statistics, and it'll give you a whole bunch of different types of average. And it kind of defines them for you a little bit, which is nice. Like if you don't know what the beta distribution is, it doesn't tell you much more than returns the beta probability, but it can give you a little bit of information. And it has some tools for finding things like correlation coefficients, different distributions, and other tools that you might use as you go along. But you can also see our norm inverse, our norm dis. They're all, our median, max, min, they're all embedded in this list. I'll mention this later. I'm not a big fan of these quartile tools. They can be a little bit untrustworthy just because of how Excel has them set up. So I'm not going to use them, but there are. And if you want to play with how Excel finds quartiles, it can be a useful set of tools. You just have to be careful on how you use them. So anyway, back to these kind of basic tools. If we want to find a standard deviation, the command is stdev. So again, we could find it under more functions, but if we know the command, or even kind of sort of remember the command, you start typing and it will tell you, some options for those tools. If this is a sample data, we'll use the stdev.s specifically. If it's population, the stdev.p for population. If you just use stdev, that is an old-fashioned command in Excel, and it will still work as a sample. But since this is, I think, version 213 or 2013, using the stdev.s is nice. And similarly, if we want to find the median, we can literally just type in median. And find the median of that data. It is nice, by the way, to have this data be in order. for Excel. So it can be nice to highlight that data, go up to your data tab and sort down to get your list in a nice order. So if we want to identify that median, it's one of these 11s. How much data do we have here? We've got 30 data points. So 30 divided by, or 30 plus 1 divided by 2 is it 30 data points? Yeah. So 30 plus 1 is 31, divided by 2 is 15 and a half. So we're going to go, oops. The top list will be the first 15. And I'm just going to give it some color. And then the bottom 15. Why is that 16? We have 30 data points or 31? Oh, we have 31. Okay. So then 16 is that halfway point. Okay. So if we go down, that's 15, 16. So that particular 11 is our median. Okay. Our minimum, so once it's sorted, finding that minimum at 5 is fairly easy. But if you ever need to use a minimum command, min works very well. Oops. Doing good clicking today. And same for max. Again, highlight that data. Oh, messed up my 5 there. Minimum 5, maximum 17. Now, as I said, using the quartile tools you can, as long as you're careful about the exclude, include rules for it. But once you have this broken up into 2 lists this way, I think it's really easiest to find those first and second quartiles by just highlighting the upper data and finding the median of that upper data. So median of this upper data set, those first 15, that gives you Q1, finding the median equals, don't forget the equals, median of that lower data set will give you Q3. So you can play around with the quartile tools. Again, most of it has to do with whether you're including or excluding that point. We're using the kind of strict statistical method of doing it. Excel is giving you options, but sometimes those options can be more problematic. For a lot of our other tools, particularly in chapter 3, we needed interquartile range. There isn't well, there might be if we look under the formulas, but I don't know a nice tool for interquartile range. And nothing jumps out under I. So, but there might be one. But once we have those quartiles, we know we can find the interquartile range just by taking Q3 and subtracting Q1. So take the difference between those cells and we'll have the interquartile range. If we want to find the boundaries for those outliers, remember it was Q1 minus 1.5 interquartile range. So we can just put that in, equals Q1 minus 1.5 times that interquartile range, and it'll calculate it for us. So anything less than 3 would be considered an outlier. For our boundary for outliers on the high end, Q3, so again, equals Q3 plus 1.5 times interquartile range. And that way, if any of those values change, it'll recalculate it for us without us having to retype all our formulas. Since neither of those have, well, neither of those boundaries have any data outside of them in our list, we don't have any outliers. So that's our descriptive statistic tools, but we also have tools for things like binomial distributions. So if we want to look at our tools for binomial distributions, we can, again, if we know or sort of know that what the command's called, we can just start typing binomial. Binomial, and notice we get this binomial distribution tool coming up right away. This one down here without the period in it is an old-fashioned one. You can tell it's got the little warning sign on it. This binom dist tool is nice, returns individual term binomial distribution probabilities. And notice it gives us a list of what the commands are. If that ever disappears on you, you can get it by going to those more function tools as well. But it wants the number of, or the numbers, the number of trials, the probability, and whether you want it cumulative or not. So if we want to know, say, 5 successes out of 20 trials with a 25% probability of success, and the cumulative asks, do we want it to be everything that value and below, or just that value? If I want everything that value or below, we can type in true for cumulative true. If we want it to be just that value, we'd say false, cumulative false. Or you could use 1 for true and 0 for false. So that particular command would give us the binomial distribution value for 5 successes or less. So 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and 0 out of 20 trials with a 25% chance of success. And again, that 1 says we're adding up everything below. That will give us that probability, almost 62%. So that binomial description or distribution tool is nice. I'm going to leave that up there. But our tool really is, if we tried to put it in more abstract terms, it is X and P and then so in the calculator, we have the binomial PDF and the binomial CDF. If this is false, it's a PDF. If this is true, it's doing the CDF. So it kind of combines those tools into one. We also have a normal distribution tool, just like the calculator. And you can find those tools just, again, by going either to these formula more functions, statistical. You'll find if you go down to normal, there's a whole bunch of normal tools. But if we're just using the basic ones, equals, start typing norm, and you'll get the normal distribution, normal inverse tools popping right up. There are another 2 here for the standard normal distribution. So the norm.s is for the standard normal. Essentially, that deals with just z-scores, because it's in the standard normal distribution. If you want to use a more general normal distribution, we'll usually use the norm dis and the norm inverse tools. But again, it'll take in the value, the mean standard deviation, and whether you want it cumulative or not, we almost always want the normal distribution to be cumulative. So it'll be that value and down. So we'll again have that true false there, that 1 there. So again, if we want to know the probability of getting 45 or less, with a mean of 52 and a standard deviation of 8. And we want that cumulative. Even gives you a true false place to click there. And probability mass functions we don't tend to use. So again, we'll almost always have a 1 there. I think you could even use a T if you want to. True. Or you can type true. The default is really to put that 1 there. And you'll get the probability of that occurring. So again, that's like the norm dist tool, the norm PDF tool in the calculator. One of the nice things is if you ever click up here to change anything, it will tell you what your different inputs have to be, and that can be really handy. But just to have a reference here, the first one's your X, the 52 is your mean, and then your standard deviation, yes, and then your 1 for logic. So nice tool. There are some confidence intervals tools that we can look at in Chapter 9. Again, it's good to build those by hand, but we can look at those when we get into Chapter 9. But the norm inverse is a nice tool to make sure we have good access to. In your calculator, it's called the inverse norm tool. Here, for the handiness of the formula list, it's under your norm list. So it's just the other one, the norm dot INV for inverse. And similarly, it tells us what it wants, the probability that we're looking for. So if we want to know, say, the 40th percentile, or what the value is such that 40% is lower than it, and we still need to give the mean and standard deviation. So say a mean of 50 and a standard deviation of, I don't know, 6. But then again, that outputs what that value would be. Again, if you ever want to remember, you can just click on it and it will tell you, but just for the sake of the visuals here, probability that you're looking for, or you can think of it as the area under the curve you're looking for, or the proportion of your data that you're looking for. The probability, mean, and standard deviation. But really, those are the basic. You could do just about everything we do. Actually, you can do everything that we do in this course with Excel with those commands, with the average, stdev, median. The quartile tools, again, you can play with, but you have to be super, super, super careful with them, with that include, exclude. I do recommend doing it this way. There are some confidence interval tools under here that if you want, for the T confidence intervals and the confidence distributions for normal distributions, confidence intervals for normal distributions. We'll play with those tools with the calculator as well in Chapter 9, but we'll look at those tools there. But they're the same kinds of tools. If you want to use that tool, you've got to put in some information. We'll talk about what that information is, what the alpha stands for. But again, it defines it here. It's the significance level for the confidence interval, the standard deviation of your data, and the sample size. So just give it that information and it'll shoot out a confidence interval for you. So we'll talk about that more when we get into our latter chapters. So hopefully that's helpful. Just using some of those tools. If you need some additional help with any of that, let me know.